sayings, you are dangerously anointed. Ladies and gentlemen, there's something fascinating about people who walk into a room and the atmosphere shifts. They don't speak louder than everyone else. They don't demand attention, yet somehow they carry a weight, a sense of clarity, purpose, and presence that you can feel. I call these people dangerously anointed. Now, I know that's not a phrase we use in business or leadership circles, but it fits because the people I'm talking about are not just skilled. They're not just driven. They are called. You can see it in how they work, how they think, how they lead, and more importantly, you can feel it in why they do what they do. See, people often ask me, how do I become a great leader? The truth is, the best leaders aren't trying to be great. They're trying to be faithful to an idea, to a mission, to something bigger than themselves. Their impact is not born out of strategy. It's born out of conviction. In a world that constantly rewards performance, it's easy to believe that the goal of leadership or even life itself is to impress. From an early age, we're taught to measure ourselves by output, by results, by applause. Grades, likes, promotions, praise, these become the currency of value. And over time, we start to believe that we are only as good as what we produce. We begin chasing validation instead of vision. We start living for performance instead of purpose. But the people who create lasting change, the ones we remember, follow, and are inspired by, they operate differently. They don't show up to impress. They show up because they're called. Their drive doesn't come from the outside. It's deeply rooted in something internal, something immovable. They have a why that they can't ignore. And that why pulls them forward, even when no one's watching, even when it's hard, even when it would be easier to quit. There's something rare about a person who is not fueled by the need to be seen, but by the need to serve something bigger than themselves. That kind of person leads with purpose. And that kind of purpose cannot be faked. It cannot be manufactured. It is cultivated in silence, in struggle, in deep reflection. It's the result of asking uncomfortable questions like, why am I really doing this? And being willing to walk away from anything that doesn't align with the answer. When you're dangerously anointed, when you are walking in a calling that's deeper than your career, you begin to realize that performance is a byproduct, not the goal. You stop needing to prove yourself and start focusing on being yourself fully and without apology. That shift, while subtle on the outside, changes everything. You're no longer moved by comparison. You don't compete, you contribute. You don't need constant recognition because your fulfillment comes from knowing you're living aligned with your purpose. This is not to say that performance doesn't matter. Excellence matters. Discipline matters. Showing up and doing your best matters. But when performance becomes the goal, we start living on a stage. We perform not just our work, but our identity. We create curated versions of ourselves that are pleasing, polished, and public, but often disconnected from who we really are. That disconnection erodes authenticity, and without authenticity, there can be no trust, and without trust, there can be no true leadership. Leadership that lasts, leadership that transforms, must be rooted in something deeper. It has to come from a place of alignment, and that alignment begins with purpose. When you know why you're doing what you're doing, your actions gain weight. Your words carry power. Your influence becomes real. Because people don't follow you for what you do. They follow you because they believe in why you do it. The world is full of performers, but what we need are more people of purpose. People who are willing to show up even when it's not flashy, even when there's no applause, even when it's hard. People who care more about impact than image. People who are dangerously anointed, meaning they carry a mission that is too important to ignore, too personal to fake, too sacred to sell out. So ask yourself, are you performing or are you walking in purpose? The answer will determine the depth of your impact, because performance impresses for a moment, but purpose transforms for a lifetime. There's a quiet kind of power that some people carry. They don't raise their voice to be heard. They don't demand the spotlight. Yet when they walk into a room, you feel something shift. There's a sense of clarity, weight, and direction around them that doesn't need explanation. It's not charisma in the traditional sense. It's not loud or performative. It's something deeper. It's presence. Presence is what happens when a person is deeply rooted in their purpose. It's what you experience when someone is so aligned with who they are and why they're here that their very being speaks before their mouth ever does. It's not about status or position, it's about substance. We've all encountered people who carry titles but lack presence. And we've also met people without titles who command the room, simply because of who they are and how they show up. When someone is dangerously anointed, when they are walking in their calling with intention, their presence does the talking. They don't have to explain themselves. They don't need to push. Their clarity speaks for them. Their actions reinforce it. Their energy communicates it. And what's more, people sense it, not in a mystical way, but in a deeply human one. We're wired to respond to authenticity. We instinctively lean into people who live with alignment because it creates a sense of safety and trust. It tells us this person knows where they're going. Maybe they can help me find my way too. That's the essence of leadership. Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about having enough clarity within yourself to hold space for others while they find their answers. And you can't fake that kind of presence. You can fake confidence, you can fake charm, but you can't fake alignment. People can sense when something is off. They can feel when your words and your energy don't match. They may not be able to explain it, but they know it. That's why presence matters more than performance, because presence is what builds trust. Presence is what gives your message weight. Presence is what makes your leadership sustainable. Some of the most impactful leaders in history didn't always speak first, but when they did, people listened, not because they were the loudest, but because they were the clearest. Their presence had already made the space ready. Their lives were already living the message. And that's the key. When your presence is aligned with your purpose, you don't have to over-explain. Your life becomes the message. Your consistency becomes the credibility. Your presence becomes your platform. This is especially important in a world where so many are trying to be seen. It's tempting to believe that if we just say the right things, post the right quotes, or build the right image, we'll be taken seriously. But the truth is, the people who make the greatest impact are often the ones who speak the least and live the most. They're not trying to be impressive, they're trying to be honest. They don't posture, they posture less and posture purpose. And that authenticity is magnetic. So if you want to lead, start with presence. If you want to inspire, don't just focus on what to say, focus on who you're becoming. Because your presence is not something you create, it's something you carry. It flows out of clarity, it flows out of alignment, it flows out of purpose. And when you carry that with consistency, You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. People will lean in. They'll listen. They'll follow. Because presence always speaks louder than words. Some people go through life simply accepting the way things are. They follow the rules, they stick to the systems, they move within the lines drawn by others because it's easier, safer, and more predictable. But then there are others. There are those who walk into a room and immediately make you question everything. They don't accept things just because that's the way they've always been. They don't go along with the status quo. They don't settle for good enough. Instead, they challenge the very systems and structures that others have grown comfortable with. They make us uncomfortable, not out of malice, but because they see something more, something bigger, something better. These are the dangerously anointed individuals. These are the ones who ask questions no one else dares to ask. They push boundaries, not for the sake of pushing boundaries, but because they believe there is something more to be done, something greater to be built, something different to be created. And that's exactly why they're dangerous. Not because they harm, but because they challenge us to grow. Challenging the norm is never easy. It's uncomfortable, it requires courage. It demands a willingness to stand alone, to risk rejection, to face criticism. When you walk in purpose, when you know there's something bigger at play, you understand that being uncomfortable is a small price to pay for the potential of real change. The dangerously anointed are not people who follow in the footsteps of others. They carve their own path. They look at systems that have been in place for years, systems that everyone else accepts as inevitable, and they ask, why? They look at how things are done, and they think, there has to be a better way. History is full of people who have challenged the norm, often at great personal cost. From the abolition of slavery to the civil rights movement, from scientific breakthroughs to the tech revolution, every monumental change in society began with someone daring to question what was accepted as normal. Think about Martin Luther King Jr., who didn't just accept the racial injustice of his time. Think about Steve Jobs, who didn't just accept the limitations of technology. Think about Rosa Parks, who didn't just accept the segregated bus system. These individuals didn't challenge the norm to be rebellious. They challenged the norm because they could see the better world on the other side. And that's the key. It's not about rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It's about vision. It's about seeing beyond the present and imagining what could be. The dangerously anointed are the ones who refuse to conform to a world that's too comfortable with mediocrity. They stand up for what they believe in, regardless of how uncomfortable it may make others. And they do it not to be disruptive for the sake of disruption, but because they know that growth only happens when we challenge what we think we know. These individuals understand that progress requires change, and change requires discomfort. If you're not willing to step outside of what's comfortable, then you're not going to make a real impact. It's easy to follow the rules. It's easy to stay in line. It's easy to do what everyone else is doing. But true leadership, the kind that changes the world, comes from questioning the status quo. It comes from seeing something in the world that needs to be different and taking the necessary steps to make that change, even when it's hard. And let's be clear, this isn't about being a troublemaker. It's about being a visionary. The people who challenge the norm are the ones who see possibilities where others see limitations. They see solutions where others see problems. They see potential where others see dead ends. And that's why they're so powerful, because their willingness to challenge the norm opens up new possibilities for everyone. So if you want to be dangerously anointed, if you want to make a lasting impact, then you have to be willing to challenge the norm. You have to be willing to ask hard questions, to push boundaries, to step into discomfort, because only by challenging the way things have always been will we ever create something better. Only by refusing to accept good enough, will we ever see what could be. And only by standing firm in your purpose will you ever have the courage to challenge what's been holding you and others back. In a world that constantly celebrates visibility, it's easy to believe that the more we do, the more people will take notice of us. We see influencers on social media, business leaders in the spotlight, and public figures who constantly seem to be in front of cameras, pushing their brands, pushing their message. And while visibility has its place, it's important to remember that true influence doesn't come from seeking attention. It comes from having a conviction so deep that it naturally draws people to you. When someone is dangerously anointed, they don't have to force influence. They don't need to constantly tell people how great they are, how much they know, or how successful they've been. Their influence isn't tied to their followers or their numbers. It's tied to their why. It's tied to a sense of purpose so powerful that others can't help but be drawn in. They speak not to be heard, but to share something they deeply believe in. Their message comes from their heart, not from a desire to gain recognition. And because of that, people listen. Not because they're trying to be popular, but because their words resonate with truth. Think about the people who have had the greatest impact in history. Those who built movements, who changed industries, who inspired revolutions. They didn't get there by seeking attention. They got there by standing firm in their beliefs, even when it was unpopular. They got there by consistently showing up with purpose, day after day, without the need for external validation. Their influence came from their ability to stand for something larger than themselves. And that kind of influence doesn't require constant self-promotion. It simply grows naturally because people feel it. It resonates with people. It inspires people to think, to act, and to join in. Dangerously anointed people understand this principle deeply. They don't chase attention. They don't need to sell themselves. Instead, they focus on what's important, their purpose, their values, and their mission. When you are driven by a deep conviction, the external recognition becomes secondary. What matters is the impact you're making, not the applause you receive along the way. And when people see that kind of dedication, they are drawn to it. They see someone who is unwavering, someone who isn't swayed by external noise. They see someone who is committed to something bigger than personal gain, and that kind of authenticity is magnetic. Conviction creates a kind of power that doesn't rely on external sources. It's an inner strength that pulls people in, not because you're trying to sell them something, but because you believe so deeply in what you're doing that they can't help but want to be a part of it. It's the difference between someone who is constantly trying to get noticed and someone whose presence naturally commands attention. The first person is chasing validation. The second person is living in alignment with their calling, and their actions speak for themselves. This kind of influence isn't loud. It's quiet, but undeniable. It's the kind of influence that doesn't need to scream for recognition because it stands firm in its own truth. It's the kind of influence that changes minds, shifts perspectives, and moves people to action without ever asking for anything in return. And while the world may be full of people seeking attention, the world is starving for those who are willing to lead with purpose and conviction. So if you want to be a person of influence, don't chase the spotlight. Instead, chase your purpose. Live it every single day. Let your words match your actions, and let your actions match your values. Influence that is based on conviction will never fade. It will last far longer than any fleeting moment of fame or recognition. And in the end, the impact you make will be the true measure of your influence. There's a certain kind of loneliness that comes with living in alignment with your purpose. It's not the kind of loneliness that stems from isolation, but from being misunderstood. People who are dangerously anointed often find themselves in this space, where their actions, their words, and their drive don't always make sense to those around them. They are visionaries, and visionaries are rarely understood in the moment. In fact, being misunderstood is almost a prerequisite for anyone who is truly ahead of their time. It's easy to think that if we're misunderstood, something must be wrong. We might second guess ourselves, question our direction, or even wonder if we're on the right path. But in reality, being misunderstood isn't a sign of failure. It's often a sign that we are doing something extraordinary, something that challenges the status quo. The dangerously anointed are frequently misunderstood because they are driven by a vision that others might not yet see. They are not satisfied with the way things are. They are compelled by a vision of something better, something more, something different. And when that vision is still unfolding, when it's still in the process of being brought to life, it can be difficult for others to understand. People are drawn to what's familiar, what's safe, what's comfortable. They gravitate toward the status quo because it's predictable. But those who are living out a bigger purpose are anything but predictable. They are called to break new ground, to question assumptions, and to forge paths where none exist. And in the early stages, that doesn't always make sense to everyone. But here's the thing. The fact that they are misunderstood doesn't stop them. The dangerously anointed do not need validation to keep going. They don't need the approval of others to stay on their path. Their consistency isn't fueled by external praise or recognition. It's fueled by a deep inner conviction that this is the right thing to do, even if no one else sees it right away. They are willing to persist in the face of doubt, in the face of criticism, and sometimes even in the face of outright opposition. They understand that great change rarely comes easily, and that the path to making an impact is often lonely and difficult. There's a quiet resilience in being misunderstood. It requires a kind of strength that isn't immediately visible to others. People may not always see the work being done behind the scenes. They may not understand the late nights, the sacrifices, the quiet moments of reflection and struggle. But those who are dangerously anointed are committed to their purpose regardless of whether others see the full picture. They continue to show up day after day because they know that consistency is the key to breakthrough. They know that their actions over time will speak louder than any words of doubt or discouragement. Being misunderstood is part of the price of leadership. It's part of the price of living a life that is different, that challenges norms, that questions systems. But the dangerously anointed don't shy away from that challenge. They lean into it. They know that the value of their work is not determined by how others perceive them in the moment. The value is in the consistency with which they show up, in the commitment to their mission, in the dedication to their calling. They know that over time, the world will catch up to them, and when it does, they'll be ready. The doubters will become believers. The critics will become supporters. Because in the end, consistency is undeniable. This is the beauty of the journey of the dangerously anointed. They don't need to prove themselves because their actions are the proof. They don't need to explain their vision because the results speak for themselves. And even though they may be misunderstood in the early stages, their consistency and commitment to their purpose will eventually shift the narrative. What was once seen as impossible will become inevitable. What was once met with skepticism will be recognized as visionary. So if you find yourself misunderstood, know that you're not alone. Know that this is a sign that you are on the right path. Stay consistent, stay committed. Trust that your purpose will eventually speak for itself, and in time, others will understand. The dangerous, anointed don't need to explain their journey. They live it And through their consistency, they show the world that anything worth doing is worth doing, even when no one else gets it.